And that's, again, this is the piece that's very hard for people, is that they just go so externally to cultural stuff. But one of the things that can help with that is to understand that culture is just a set of beliefs. It's not fact. It's just a set of beliefs that people have agreed to. And culture changes all the time, too. And that's how you know that it isn't fact, because it changes all the time.
Oh, man.
We start to agree to a different set of facts.
Yeah, this is wild. So you can treat culture the same way you treat your thoughts, essentially.
Exactly. Because that's all it is. It's just a collective thought.
Welcome back to the One Whole Life podcast. My name is Shawn Francis, and today's podcast is fantastic. We have a return guest, Dr. Elam, and I just went through the entire thing, and my biggest problem and concern was there's too much awesome stuff in there that I was trying to cut it out for social media, and I'm essentially just reposting the entire podcast. I mean, we talked about depression, what it comes from, what it looks like, and the miscommunications that's been happening, especially in my life since the very beginning. Locus of control, and if you have an internal and external locus of control, what one is better and leads to more success and happiness in life. The problem with perfectionism, behavior change, we touched on everything. And I left with so many nuggets of wisdom. I am excited to share them with you. Again, if you would like to support what I'm doing, head over to owlmentalhealth.com. Now, out of respect for Dr. Elam, she asked me if I would read this, and to be honest, I should probably read it at the beginning of every podcast. But here we go. This podcast represents the opinions of Shawn Francis and Dr. Marnie K. Elam. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is not intended to assess, diagnose, or treat any medical or psychological condition. If you think you need immediate assistance, please call 911 or go to your local emergency room. This podcast is for information only. It is not therapy. This podcast is only for informational and educational purposes and should not be considered therapy or any form of treatment. Any person who uses information from this podcast does so at their own risk, and neither Mr. Francis nor Dr. Elam shall be held liable in any way for any outcomes of use. Privacy is the utmost importance to us. All people, places, and scenarios mentioned in the podcast have been changed to protect the patient confidentiality. This podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing standard of care or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made in this podcast. And in no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establish a doctor-patient therapeutic relationship. Guys, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome back to the podcast Dr. Marnie Elam. Confucius said we have two lives, and the second begins when we realize that we only have one. We're all given one whole life. And when we find and break the barriers that are preventing us from living fully, we have an audacious attempt to improve mental health. One Whole Life with Shawn Francis. Can we start with that? So I went and saw my psychiatrist. I can never remember what one prescribes meds, but psychiatrist to one to get a refill, or she does a yearly checkup with me. Mm-hmm. And then I mentioned that I'm doing these podcasts with her, and was like, I never asked her what depression was, and I've been asking almost every guest like what it is to them, and she explained it to me just like everyone else did, but I was kind of blown away that like it wasn't explained to me that, you know, and maybe I'm wrong here, and this is why I'm asking you to, that it was a collection of symptoms, and depending on how long or how bad the symptoms get, it can control your life. And that might be the difference between just experiencing a little bit of depression versus like chronic, life-altering, lay in bed all day kind of depression. And she also explained it like it's like having like a heart disease in a way. Like you can exercise and do all the things right, but there might be just something wrong with you that no amount of exercise or anything that you do is going to help you. You might need meds to help you on that side, where other people can do the exercise, do the eating right, and it might help, with your issues. Is that Is that accurate? Is that kind of how your work around chronic depression versus everyday kind of normal symptoms too, or am I off track there?
Well, technically speaking, I mean, when you make the diagnosis of clinical depression, it is
Yeah.
the title of, and this is true for every diagnosis.
Okay.
Every psychological diagnosis is basically a name that's been applied to a cluster of symptoms that tend to occur together
Okay.
at its basis. So depression being one of those things. So it is this collection of symptoms, which, if severe enough and lasting long enough, the minimal amount of time is 2 weeks. But most people who really have clinical depression, it lasts quite a bit longer than that, unfortunately. So yeah, technically, that is what it is.
Okay.
In terms of the sort of biology versus behavior, which is kind of what you're talking about when you say like the anomaly or the analogy of heart disease, where there are behavioral factors and there are biological factors, right?
Right.
And with heart disease, you might have genetic factors. You might have a heart defect. There might be something else that's just going on with your heart. And we all know, we've all heard horror stories of somebody that ate really well and exercised every day and did all this stuff and then dropped dead of a heart attack at 45.
Yeah.
And yeah, that can still happen. And with depression, some people do seem more prone to it. It's highly likely that there are perhaps some genetic components to it, because some of the mood disorders do run in families. Bipolar tends to be more common in families, depression, those sorts of things. But we also don't know like how much of that might be learned. So if you grow up with a depressed parent and they are constantly very negative and depressed and have a lot of depressive thoughts, then of course they're teaching their child, and quite often to think the same way, not intentionally. It's not, they want their child to be depressed, but children pick up on the way their parents think, right?
Yeah.
So there may be some factors of just growing up. There's also experiential factors. I mean, if you have a lot of very traumatic things happen to you or very sad things happen to you, those things can go from being sort of a normal grief reaction, normal sadness, into depression if they're not managed well, if they pile up on top of each other, if the person doesn't have support for those things. So what starts out as non-biological can sort of become biological over time, because everything affects the brain, right? Everything you do, our behaviors affect our brain affects our behaviors. So yeah, some people with a more mild case of depression who may also develop it at an older age, so they have a lot more years of coping and not being depressed, so they know what it's like not to be depressed. They may be able to pull out of that more easily without medication. People who've been depressed for a really long time, who have a very severe depression, who maybe got depressed at a younger age, and so we're not able to have a lot of experiences of coping and those sorts of things, may need medication. Okay. It's not bad one way or the other, right? I mean, if you have a heart problem, hopefully you kind of still need to do both, because the flip side of that is the medication isn't going to take care of everything either. If you continue to eat, 1 million pounds of cholesterol every day and not do any exercise and whatever, you are greatly risking having a heart attack or increasing heart disease or congestive heart failure or something like that. Just because the medication can get overwhelmed by those things. So, and I'm not a doctor, so I'm a physician, so I don't want to, give medical advice or anything, but just from that standpoint of looking at behavioral and biological things, we know that a lot of illnesses have both factors. If you're diabetic, you need to monitor your blood sugar, but you also need to be careful about how much sugar you eat.
Yeah. No,
right.
exactly.
So there's lots of things out there that the mind and the body are connected. So whatever's going on in the body is going to affect the mind, and what's going on in the mind can also affect the body.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it feels so new, since like you're saying exactly kind of what I've discovered on too. I'm just, I don't know. Part of me is a little like angry at the system for not being told that sooner, and then there's another part of me like, did they know the whole time? Because it seems like we're always just learning new things about how this all works. So, and me being a kid from 1990, whatever, 3 when I started this whole thing. It was relatively new. Like I think I mentioned the last one was overprescribed lithium because they didn't know how to treat like kids' depression where I was. So they gave me an adult dose, and that created issues in itself. So there's like part of me that is a little like angry about it, and then the other part of me is super compassionate. Like, man, we're just kind of at the forefront of maybe understanding of how all of this works.
Well, we are, and the other issue is every individual is different.
Right.
So we don't have great ways of knowing exactly what's going on with one person, right? Like how this person got to here versus that person got to here. And we're discovering more and more. I've read recently that there's some research being done on some tests, some blood tests and things that could be done to determine like which medication is going to work best, which would be great because lots of people go through multiple medications before they find the one that works. And, that's not a fun thing to go through. And I'm sure, there's research, depression is very common. So there's a lot of research being done on causes and treatments and that sort of thing. But the fortunate news is it doesn't matter to the treatment as much to know how you got depressed. Treatment is successful regardless of how you got there.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned that last time. That was really like weight came up like you can start right now and start doing.
You can, and that's great news. I mean, we don't have to go through this whole arduous process of figuring out, oh well, did this happen? Did that happen? And a lot of times, even if you do that, it's still conjecture. You still don't know exactly why somebody might have gotten depressed because sometimes things are coincidental. They're not causal. They occurred at the same time, but they didn't cause each other. So you can conjecture till the cows come home about why somebody might be feeling how they're feeling or have gotten depressed. And you may have part of the answer. I mean, there might be some very, very clear precipitant to it. But for a lot of people, there isn't. And when you ask them, they're like, I don't know. I just started to feel really bad. A bunch of things happened, or even nothing happened. I just started to feel bad. And it just got worse and worse. It's likely for people who have longer term clinical depression. I think it's something that's what's called overdetermined, which means there's probably multiple factors that happen, biological factors, behavioral factors, experiential things that occurred. Perhaps internal factors, ways of thinking, viewpoints, those kinds of things. And they all came together to cause this problem.
Okay. So it feels like what you said last time too is like this self-awareness, or maybe just is it watching your patterns or being aware of what's going on internally seemed to be like an important step there, right? And
yeah,
for me it was when, excuse my language, like when shit hit the fan, that's when I started going, holy crap, what's really going on in there, instead of before it was trying to control external factors when it's, and everything I've read, exactly. Everything I've read is like, and talking to people like you, it's like, oh, it's all internal work. It's all like, you got to be an inner space explorer, kind of a thing.
Well, I mean, it's not that you can't try to change the environment. I mean, that can be a really good thing to do if the environment is horrible. If you're in some toxic situation and it's causing you pain, then trying to get out of that is probably a good idea. But getting out of it still requires that you take the action.
Right.
That's the problem, is that when people spend a lot of time trying to control all this stuff that's going on outside of them, it's just not possible. It would be great if it worked, but it doesn't, because you can't control other people.
Yeah, it's not a video game.
Yeah, I mean, you can try all you want. Good luck with that. You can't really control the world. Things just occur. I mean, look around every day. Stuff happens to people, both good and bad. So, you don't control everything that's going on outside, and you can't control even everything inside either. But you can focus on certain things that you can control, that you can influence, and choices that you can make, and those sorts of things. And those things can make a difference. But the idea is control what it's possible to control, and don't waste a bunch of effort trying to control things you can't control.
That makes sense. It's got a very Stoic philosophy kind of feel to it.
Well, it's just reality, right?
Well, it is really.
You're a mouse in a wheel otherwise. The mouse runs and runs and runs and runs, uses up all its energy, falls exhausted off the wheel, and guess what? It's right where it started.
Yeah.
It got nowhere.
Right.
And you can do that yourself too, psychologically, physically. You can run yourself ragged trying to, I'm going to control this and I'm going to control that person and I'm going to do this and it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You can influence other people.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing to try to do. I mean, we do that every day. That's called civilization, right? Saying please, saying thank you. Those are all about, trying to influence people. But we don't really control them. And over a long, you might be able to control something externally for a short time. Some stuff you can control, but there's too many variables that can intervene that you don't even know are going to come and that you can't control. So if you're not spending at least some of your effort learning to control yourself and learning to cope and creating some resilience and grit within yourself so that when those things do happen, and they will, that you aren't just completely bowled over by them, then you will be bowled over by them. I mean, that's generally what's going to happen. And that's sort of this, the other thing that happens with that is this idea of locus of control. Locus of control is sort of, how do you view things in terms of why things happen? So do you tend to think that you are the captain of your fate and the master of your destiny, or do you tend to think that things are caused by fate or other people or whatever, some external force? And if you tend to think that, you tend to have an external locus of control, which is that things are sort of controlled outside of you, and what you do doesn't really matter very much, then you're kind of always looking for these external things to change and not really doing much for yourself. But there's a huge problem with that. Those things don't really care what you're doing, right? And they're going to go on however they go on. And if you are not sort of stopping and saying, well, what's my piece, or what could I do, even in a negative situation where it might be there's somebody else, involved in it, that is really causing a problem, it doesn't mean there's nothing you can do. And what we know from research on locus of control is that people who have a more internal locus of control tend to just be more successful, even though it isn't always true that you are the captain of your fate and the master of your destiny. Sometimes there isn't a lot you can do. But when the focus is on what I can do, even if it's a little thing, people will tend to do that then. If you're constantly looking outside, then you're just sort of waiting for things to happen. And people with external locus of control also tend to just be really angry a lot because things aren't happening the way they want them to happen. And there's a blame of external circumstances. And I blame that person, or I blame that situation or whatever for my current life, for my current situation. And then I'm just sort of waiting for something else to happen to fix it. That's probably not going to happen. So it's kind of, at its very source, you look at it like an internal locus of control person tends to feel that I act on the world and the world reacts to me.
Right.
In whatever way that happens. An external locus of control person tends to think that the world acts on me, so I react to the world. So something will happen and they'll get really angry or really depressed or start screaming at people or doing something like that. And then they wonder why, like, they get in trouble. Well, I just did that because this happened, or because that happened, or because that person started it. Not recognizing that, well, it doesn't matter if somebody else did something. That doesn't give you then the right to, beat somebody up or scream and yell or do something like that. And they kind of, because they're external, they don't often see the effect of their own choices and their own actions.
Okay.
So it's a constant frustration. too. Like, it's just like I'm constantly frustrated because I don't get what I want and my life isn't going the way I want it, and it's your fault, or it's the world's fault or something like that. So it's that point of view tends to cause a lot of problems for both the people who hold it and often for the people around them, because they tend to get blamed.
Is this like part of that cognitive bias? Like it sounds like there's a lot of those mixed in there, like the shoulds, like things should be this way. And
yes,
that kind of
people
idea.
should do this for me.
Yeah,
right?
With the mind reading, right?
It
They should
shouldn't
read
happen.
my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I shouldn't have to do this, or this shouldn't happen like that. Certainly there are a lot of shoulds in that. There's a lot of projection onto other people and things as to why it happens, right? Well, yeah, but I was late because blah, 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 but you've been late every single day. Well, but my boss is terrible. I didn't get fired because I'm late every day for the last 3 weeks. I got fired because my boss is, an ass or whatever. And that's like a total external locus of control kind of thing. And the problem with that is then you never stop being late.
You never change, right? Like,
no, because you don't. Why would I? Why
would
I change if I don't see that part of the issue is me?
Huh. Yeah. When we were talking about this a few weeks ago, I went and took the test.
Did you?
Yeah, and I was very, very internal locus of control on that side, and I wasn't very surprised when I kind of read about it. But they said there were some like cons to it too.
Mm-hmm. There are
totally like. I was almost too extreme to the point where it would be frustrating when I thought I had all this control of things going on, and when something didn't work, or when I wasn't trying making the world bend to my way, then it would cause some of that anxiety and depression kind of situations, and a bunch of light bulbs went off in my head.
Yeah, you don't want to be. I mean, it's a continuum. It's not a dichotomous thing. It's a continuum, and you don't want to be so far on either continuum that it's just causing you problems. Because if you're so far on the internal side, then you tend to take responsibility for things that aren't your responsibility. So, it's my fault that this happens. But it's like, no, you know what? Sometimes life just sucks, and sometimes life just happens. And there was nothing you could have done about it. You don't control everything. So, like things like survivor's guilt, as a more extreme example, can happen. I should have been able to save my buddy kind of thing. Why should you have been able to do that? You were also wounded. You couldn't move, whatever. And so that you can be too internal, which is also, it's a misapprehension of reality in the same way that being too external is. The idea is to figure out, again, sort of, what do you control? You are responsible for what you control.
Right.
If you have that question, what am I responsible for in life? You're responsible for what you can control. If you can't control it, you're not responsible for it. And there's a lot of things we don't really control that are external to us. And so that's the other piece, is like, well, I'm not superhuman. I'm not Superman. I can't do things beyond my physical capabilities, my cognitive capabilities. And accepting that, that's a hard thing to accept sometimes. It's like, we are limited. That's the nature of human beings. We can't do all things. We can't be all things. And sometimes things just happen, and it's not your fault. You didn't make it happen. You did your best. You can do your best and it still goes wrong. You can make a right decision and it still doesn't work.
Right.
Sometimes people say, oh, I made a mistake. You didn't make a mistake. It just didn't work. Yeah. Sometimes things you do what you know to do with the information that you have, right? So you do your due diligence, you evaluate, you make a decision, and it's from what you know, it is the right decision. But then it unfolds in some way where there was information you didn't have and you couldn't have had, or it just doesn't work for whatever reason. Sometimes stuff just fails. It just doesn't work. And it's nobody's fault. And it's not that you did anything wrong. It just didn't work.
I'm holding back my laughter because I fall into this trap a lot because, you have like multiple choices, right? And you make one, and if it doesn't work, I have this pattern, this history of going back and going, oh, if I would have went that way, things would have been different, right? I think a lot of people do that. And what I've had to, I don't know how to describe it. You have this like groove in your brain, that pattern, and I'm trying to create a new one where I go, at that moment, that was the best, like you were saying, that was the best decision I could have made there. Now at this decision, knowing that one didn't work, now this is the new best decision I could make. And it always
Yeah.
seems to come back to the present moment, which which is that's why I start to laugh. Cause like, that seems to always be the answer is, what are you doing right now in this moment to make the decisions based on the best information you have and where you are in life, kind of a thing. Which,
Well, the what ifing thing, which I always find really interesting, is you're right. Lots of people do it, but we have it. Talk about a cognitive bias, because we have a cognitive bias towards, if only I had whatever, fill in the blank, taken that job or gone to that school or married that person or done whatever it is we didn't do, things would be so much better. Really, and that how.
right, exactly. Yeah.
What if you had, taken that job and the building blew up with a gas leak or something and you died? Or, you went to this other school and there was a school shooter. I mean, there's a lot. Now, those are extreme examples, but you have no idea what would have happened had you gone some other way. It's just interesting that we have this tendency to go towards, it would have been great. It could have been horrible.
Yeah. Is that helpful for people? I was just talking to somebody about this, like going to the other extreme of what I hate to call it a delusion because it sounds bad, but like a made up thought, or some perspective,
fantasy.
Fantasy.
Yeah.
So if you have this positive fantasy, is it helpful or even positive or a good thing to have the opposite side of it? Or is it just better to go none of those?
I think it's just better not to do it at all, because the fact, I think it's better just to say, I have no idea. And it doesn't matter anyway, because that's not what I did.
Right. Yeah. That's what I thought, but I just
what is the
know.
point? Again, let me not be a mouse in a wheel.
Yeah. Get me out of this fantasy.
That's very mouse in a wheel, exhaustive thinking, because the fact is you didn't do it, and you can think and think and think and, lament and lament as much as you want, and you will never know what would have happened.
Right.
So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what wouldn't have happened. And really, it never matters what you aren't doing.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not skydiving right now. Who cares? I mean, we're not like picking up trash. It doesn't matter what we're not doing. There's literally like a billion things we are not doing. But it matters what you are doing.
Yeah.
And if you make a choice and it doesn't work, okay. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean it was a wrong choice. You may be able to go back and realize it was a wrong choice if you were impulsive or you didn't get information or whatever. You learn from, okay, well, next time I need to not be so impulsive. I really need to stop and get information. But that problem solving shouldn't be about value judgment. It should be about learning.
Gotcha.
Let me learn a better way of problem solving. But lots of things don't work. I always try to keep in my mind when I am, getting frustrated with trying things that aren't working, is that Edison tried something like over 1,000 prototypes of a light bulb. And he was, by then, even, when he was trying to create a light bulb, he was already very well known. So the press were hammering him and they were making fun of him, and people were, lambasting him and just doing all this stuff. And, well, how does it feel to fail so many times and all this stuff? And he just basically said, well, now I know what doesn't work.
Right.
What if he'd stopped because, oh, boo-hoo, I'm so terrible and, whatever. Why are you personalizing it in the first place?
Yeah.
When something doesn't work, it isn't necessarily personal. It just didn't work.
Yeah.
Stuff doesn't work or works all the time. And if everybody who failed at stuff that they were trying quit and personalized that, we would not have airplanes and light bulbs and cars and space travel and all the things we have that took tons and tons and tons of effort and time and failure to finally get something that was successful.
Yeah, I had to change that as a pole vaulter. I stopped calling it failure as long as I learned something. If I felt like I failed, but then I didn't write in my journal or learn something from the experience, then I counted it as failure, because no growth in any direction there. And I don't know if that's healthy either, but it felt better than just beating myself up for not making a bar or something like that. And then I took that into every other aspect of my life now. And it's
I think
still
what's
hard.
healthy is what works for you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if that's what works for you. But I would say one of the things that I think has been a problem in modern culture is that failure is such a dirty word. It's not.
No.
Is like, I actually use the word failure because I want to take the power out of it.
Oh, I love that.
Failure is not bad. Failure is not terrible. Failure does not mean anything about you. It's not personal. It's not you're a horrible person. To fail does not make you a failure. Those are two very different things. People fail all day long. We do all kinds of stuff that we don't do very well, or what. So what? The only reason it ever has meaning is if you give it meaning. If you don't give failure any meaning, it has none. And that's what I'm saying about, people do clearly fail and things do fail. And calling it a failure is just calling it what it is.
Yeah.
Like Edison did fail. He failed like 1,000 times. Okay. In his efforts. He himself was not a failure. He was highly successful. The Wright brothers failed. Lots of people failed in doing a thing.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that effort failed. That thing itself failed. So the light bulb failed. It just didn't work. But we don't look at, when a thing fails, we don't look at it and go, you're terrible. And you're, when something goes out on your car, you're not like screaming at it, calling it names and telling it it's a failure.
Yeah.
You go get it fixed. You don't judge it. And we don't need to judge it either. But one of the things I think that we do want to move away from is the idea that to fail at something or to not be good at something is terrible. And, it's going to ruin your self-esteem. It only ruins your self-esteem if you take it personally and you don't realize that you're a human being and that failure is just part of being a human being. Because that, I think, if you do that, then you suppress people trying things. Because you never know if you're going to fail or not, especially if you haven't done it before. How'd you do the first time you tried to pole vault?
Oh, it was awful, but it was fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there have been lots of things I've tried and been bad at, especially in the beginning. You fail over and over and you keep practicing and you fail less.
Yeah.
And you get better.
Does that move you more into the external locus of control if you're focusing on just the failure all of the time because external forces are coming at you at that point? You're looking at the failure as something that happened to you versus something you can potentially control. Does that piece work there?
Yeah, it can. I mean, the locus of control thing can work everywhere because it really is a fundamental viewpoint. It is a perspective that people have in the world.
Okay.
It depends, it's kind of foundationally in what we call attribution theory. And attribution theory has a lot of components, but at its basis, it has to do with to what do you attribute outcomes in essence. So, a good example, somebody cuts you off in traffic. What's your thought about the other person?
Well, usually you're mad at that person. Most people would be.
You're mad, but what are you thinking?
What am I thinking?
Yeah, what would you think?
I don't know if I would think they're bad anymore. I want to help you with your.
No, just what would you think? Most people kind of go, what an ass. That guy's a terrible driver. He's, whatever, right? We make attributions.
Yeah.
About that person relative to that incident.
Yeah.
And we tend to, with other people, attribute the negative things they do to internal permanent attributions, which mean it's something about them and it's something forever. And that we do the opposite with ourselves. If you cut somebody off, do you think to yourself, oh my God, I'm a terrible driver and I should never be driving and I'm an idiot? No, you probably go, oh my gosh, that was an accident. I just didn't see him. Yeah. When we make mistakes, we tend to make attributions that are external and impermanent. So they're temporary, right? Like, oh, I didn't see him, or he was in my blind spot or something like that. And it's interesting how the same behavior, we make these different attributions. But locus of control is basically an attribution. To what do we attribute the event?
Okay.
Somebody who attributes their failure to other people, other things, like a student, let's say, who is a smart person, but they just keep not doing well in school. And it's a constant, well, I failed the test because the teacher didn't grade me fairly. Oh, I failed that other test because, I was really tired. Well, I failed that other test because the teacher's a horrible person and, they should have given us a test that day. But there's always an external reason why they failed the test.
Okay.
An internal person would be like, I failed the test because I didn't study. Or I failed the test. Yeah, I was tired, but I'm tired because I stayed up too late and I should have gone to bed. Now, it could be that the teacher didn't grade you fairly, and that's okay. Then you could look at that. But it's the thread, it's the pattern that you look at.
Okay.
Is there a pattern of constantly blaming things that are external to the person versus, I know when I blew it.
So there it is. Okay, so it's not necessarily the situation. The situation is just kind of like a key to a potential pattern. So you get enough of those situations, you can figure out a pattern that you might have internally that you could try and change if you wanted to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Because it's very consistent. I mean, it's a really consistent thing. And if you think of yourself or you think of people, once you kind of know the concept, you can start to go, oh yeah, that person's internal, that person's external, because it's a pretty consistent perspective that people take across multiple aspects of their lives. Externally motivated people, external locus of control people rarely will say, yeah, that was totally my fault. There was nothing outside of me that I just didn't do that right, or I just blew it, or I made a mistake, or whatever. They just rarely will do that. People that are more in that, towards the internal side, again, there can be external factors, and that's why you don't want to be too internal, because that's just as unrealistic.
Right.
You don't control the universe.
But internal is more helpful in our society?
It's more helpful in general, because you're more likely to act if you think that there is an action you can take. And there's another concept that goes along with it that can be really helpful, and that's self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is at its core, is just basically, I believe I can. Okay. There's an old expression, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right.
Yeah.
Right?
Heard that one.
And if you combine, if you have very low self-efficacy and you just don't think that you can do things, you're not competent, I'm just not competent in a general sense to do things, then you won't try. And that can be a really bad combination with an internal locus of control, because you feel really guilty and responsible, but you don't think you can do anything. If you combine a pretty high self-efficacy with a not too high, but an internal locus of control, that produces a lot of success in life, because you think about what you control and you also think you can do it. Wow. So if you have those two thoughts, you're more likely to go do it, or at least try. You might not succeed, but you'll make the effort. And you have 100% chance that you won't succeed if you don't try. Right?
Yeah. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And if you think about it, all we're ever really doing in life is working off of probabilities. Nothing really has 100% success rate all the time. I mean, there isn't anything that you can necessarily say predictively, every single time I do this, it will 100% of the time it's going to work. I mean, maybe there's a few things, but not many that I could think of. So all we can really do with our efforts is try to increase our probabilities. So, you look at if doing nothing means I have a 10% probability of something good going on, then how would that increase if I did these two actions that are related to it? Does it increase my probability maybe to 50% or 60%? And if I did this other thing, now maybe it goes to 70%. So if I go back to the test thing, if my probability of passing my test, maybe it's 20% or something if I do nothing, like I don't study, but I was in class and but I didn't do anything to actually study for the test. I might pass, I might do well enough guessing, or I might have retained enough knowledge, but I could definitely improve my probability of success if I study. And if I study one night, then maybe I improve it by 10%. If I study for 2 or 3 days ahead of time, now maybe I put it up to 50%, 60%. If I get a good night's sleep the night before the test is in the morning, maybe now I've increased it by another 10%. So all we're ever doing is increasing probabilities of success. But some is better than none, right? So some increase is better than no increase. Some success is better than no success. And I think that's the other piece that really hangs people up, is this idea that either I have to do it 100% or I didn't do anything. Really? Because almost nothing is 100%.
Right.
That I failed somehow if I didn't do every single thing. It's like, no.
That's
maybe that piece.
That's essentially perfectionism, right?
Yeah, so perfectionism is extremely damaging. It's very highly correlated with anxiety and depression.
And that's probably extremely far on the internal control, right? The on the extreme part, does anxiety come from if you feel like you have so much control over things, you might produce perfectionistic tendencies?
Well, yes, it could, I think, but it's more thinking that you have to rather than that you could.
Yeah. Okay.
I have to be perfect, or it means something. Again, perfectionism is a lot about meaning making. It means something if I'm not perfect. I'm less than, I'm not worthy, I'm whatever it is. One of the things that I tell my perfectionistic clients and my students sometimes, I always say, put this on a Post-it note and stick it on your bathroom mirror. There's 2 things about perfectionism that make it just honestly a ridiculous goal. One is that perfection is not attainable. So perfection is neither attainable nor necessary. You can't be perfect, and you never need to be. There is nothing in life that requires perfection. And I use the example of it, trying to be perfect is sort of like trying to say, I want to be green. I really want to be green. I'm going to work super hard to be green. I am going to be green because it's really important to be green. If I was green, everything would be fantastic. And I would, my life would be great if I was green. I'm going to work really hard to be green. If I said that to somebody, they would just think I was like ridiculous, right? Like, why? What do you mean? You can't be green. First of all, maybe if I ate like a ton of asparagus or something, but you can't be green, and it's not necessary to be green. There's nothing in life that requires you to be green. Same thing with perfectionism. You cannot be perfect. So just off of that, it's not a good goal. And secondly, nothing requires it. You don't need to do it. So, and again, if you look at a cost benefit analysis of effort, so let's say that, you spend all this time studying and doing all this stuff, and you get a 97 on your test. And now you're all upset because you didn't get 100. Well, first of all, there are 96 grades below that you didn't get.
Right.
So the 97 is pretty good. And only 3 above it. And let's say that it was going to take you another 20 hours of studying to get from 97 to 100. Would that be worth it?
Right. Yeah, there's a cost of diminishing returns at some point.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And you still got the A and you still learned, and that's the point anyway. It's not to get the grade, it's to learn the material. But it's again, sort of a perspective on things that drives people to anxiety, and partly because you are always failing. You are always failing. You are not going to be perfect. And yeah, maybe you get the 100 on that test, but there's going to be one you don't. Yeah. Oof. And there's always something else coming. So it's like, great, well, I got 100 on that, but now I have another one. So now there's this anxiety to reach that goal, and expending tons of effort to try to get there when that cost isn't worth it. The cost benefit ratio is not there. There is a diminishing return. Excuse me. And then feeling really depressed when it doesn't happen, which is inevitable.
Right. Yeah. Huh.
So that's a mouse in a giant wheel who's just running all the time.
Yeah, I've been fighting depression, or depression too, but perfectionism ever since I've learned about it for the first time. But I've never heard it explained almost like another fantasy or a delusion. And it's like, wow. That makes more, like, it took 3 years from the idea of this podcast to finally launch it, because it had to be perfect and I had to know all the steps and I had to know everything before I actually did it. And then one day I was just like, I don't know what hit me. Maybe it was reading Brene Brown or something. I don't know, but it was just like you have to just start and bounce into the maze walls a few times to figure out how to get through it, and that's kind of where we are. And it hasn't been perfect. Like we've had some scheduling issues on my side too, but now I've learned from it and became better from that. And I think was like a hard thing for me to learn because I grew up like, do your best. Everything has to be perfect. Give 110, even though that doesn't even exist, And I don't know if that's one part. Not again. It probably doesn't matter, and I keep trying to figure out where it comes from. But society or my parents and where that pattern is, so I don't pass it on to other people. Or if my wife and I decide to have kids, pass it on to my kids or something like that. But yeah, I'm gonna start looking at it like that. I think like as a fantasy. In a way, because it's unattainable, like you said. It's powerful.
Well, yeah, and the non-necessity of it, I think, too, is also powerful. It's like, yeah, there is nothing in life. I can be very successful and do really well and never be perfect.
Yeah.
And I'll be a lot happier.
Right.
Because I'm not spending so much energy trying to do it. I mean, when I was younger, I was very perfectionistic too. And I mean, it drove me crazy and I was exhausted. It's exhausting.
It is. Yeah.
And for what? Again, what is the difference between a 97 and 100?
Right.
3 points. But out in the actual world, that's a meaningless difference. It's as they say, it's a difference without a distinction.
Mm.
It just doesn't really mean anything to, even if you could hit that 100 every single time. Okay, and
my dad was just talking about this with sports in a way. He was like, I wouldn't feel better if he was talking about winning games and things. He was a pretty good hockey and baseball player, but he was like, I wouldn't feel better if I won the game. I just didn't want to lose. Like that was, so we got relief instead of joy from winning games. And I was like, oh, I can feel that. I've had that a lot in my life too. And that's got to be from perfectionism in a way, right? Like, oh, thank God.
Nobody likes to lose. I mean, losing is never fun.
No, but not getting joy from it seems like it's defeating the purpose in a way. And I know there's probably some stuff going on there.
kind of too much hyper competitive, right? But and there's nothing wrong with wanting to do well or to be the best at something. So, we have an Olympics coming up here in a month or so, and there's a lot of people, they want to be great at what they do. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be great, but perfection is this, it's a level that first of all, you just can't hit, but it's also very static.
Right.
Greatness comes and goes, and what's great now will not be what's great later. So when somebody breaks your record, are you going to be so devastated and, your life is meaningless now because somebody broke your record? Which again is almost inevitable. Almost every single record that gets set gets broken at some point. Mm-hmm. In sports, right? So you can drive yourself crazy. You in order to win, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be the best. Because they're not the same thing.
Yeah, I have a friend, a lot of pole vault friends, but the one just he broke the world record 3 times a couple years ago, and then he won a gold medal at the last Olympics on the men's pole vault. And he goes, the medals are so much more important to me than the records, because the records will probably be broken, but no one can take the gold medal away from me at this Olympics. And
yeah, and that's a focus thing, right? I mean, this comes back to perspective in essence, and focus, and what you see depends on where you look.
Right.
And what's important to you is what you determine to be important, and it only has importance because you think it's important.
Yeah, feels a lot like our money situation with all this cryptocurrency going on and stuff too. Right?
Oh God, don't even. Yeah,
just provide our own value.
I just and NFTs and stuff. And I'm like, you do realize there's no actual value to these things except what people say is valuable.
Right, like baseball cards too, right? Yeah, it's all
everything that people collect is only collectible because people collect it.
Yeah, when the Beanie Baby crash happened.
Yep, Cabbage Patch Kids, the Beanie Babies. I mean, things go in and out of value based on those kinds of things. But in our own lives, it's the same thing. It's meaning making, and what you think is important is what is important to you. And if you decide it's not, then it's not, for better or worse. And so for your friend, he made the meaning out of the medals that, hey, you know what? I did this. I achieved this. He wasn't perfect, right? Because how would you even determine what perfect is in something like pole vaulting?
You can't. Like we talk about this a lot because the numbers, I call it chasing infinities, right? Like if there's a number or some kind of value that never ends, you can never be perfect because it never ends, right?
No, and you can't determine what perfection was. You can only determine what better is, right? Like what the best is, what better is.
Yep.
But what was best is no longer best, and that's the other piece. These things are very malleable, and they are interpretive. Like we're interpreting something and saying, well, that's the best now, but it won't be later.
Right.
And that's again why chasing after something like perfection, which is a static point, so unfruitful and destructive, because it's just such an amazing amount of energy going towards something that doesn't actually exist. And even if you could reach it, it won't stay. That static point will become another static point down the road with another record or something else. But your friend decided to focus on what was meaningful to him.
Right.
And he's absolutely right. I mean, he has that medal. He won that medal. No one can ever take that away from him. That will always exist.
Yep.
And that is probably a better thing to make meaning out of because of those elements. It's something that you can hang on to. The records will probably fall at some point.
Right. Can we loop back just a little bit? Is there a positive to external locus of control at all? Or is the goal to always try and shift towards the internal locus of control?
There's not a positive to being on the extreme, I think, of external locus of control, because what that breeds is a tremendous amount of passivity and resentment.
Okay.
And partly for the same reason that if you're on the extreme of the internal locus of control, it's not reality.
Okay.
Everything in the world is not somebody else's fault.
So
or fate or whatever.
Do you want to be at 50-50 on those, or do you want to, is there a percentage?
No, the research kind of indicates that more on the internal side, even if it's not always realistic, that we know that people who are optimistic, even though optimism is not always a realistic point of view, are happier and more successful. And again, because it drives action, right? Gotcha. If I, especially if you have that combination of self-efficacy and locus of control, internal locus of control, I'm more likely to act. And if I act, I'm more likely to be successful, because again, we're looking at probabilities here. I have 100%.
You're doing more experiments.
I have 100% chance of failure. Yeah, well, I have 100% chance of failure if I sit and do nothing.
Right.
And if you're very external, that's probably what you're doing. You're not doing much because you're waiting for stuff to happen to you. You're waiting for other people to do things for you or to make things happen for you, or you're waiting for fate to occur or something like that. And so a lot of your efforts, whatever you may be doing, is often going in a direction that is not materially helping your situation.
Gotcha. Okay.
So instead, you don't have a job and you need money, and instead of going out and figuring out, how can I go get a job, you go buy a lottery ticket. Nothing wrong with buying a lottery ticket, but
if you didn't buy one, you'd have 100%. No, I'm just joking.
It's just probably not going to help you, right? So the chances are you are not going to win the lottery, and you spent that money and you still don't have a job.
Right.
So, or you're just waiting for somebody to, call you, but every time you go on an interview, you're not saying like what you're going to do for the company. What you just want to know what they're going to do for you.
I feel like Disney does this with knight in shining armor, like a prince coming to rescue you every once in a while.
Well, that's a whole gender issue there. That's the whole other, yes. Okay. Women were taught for a very long time to be quite passive.
Oh, I didn't even wrap my head around that.
So that was a gender issue.
Do females fall more on the external locus of control than the internal? No,
not necessarily. And I mean, no, because the flip side of that was you were supposed to be passive, but you were also really responsible for everything that happened in your family.
Gotcha.
So if your children, right? The mother is always blamed, and psychology did a lot of that, right? If your child misbehaved, nobody called the dad.
Right.
Right. Nobody said, wow, your father must not, it was all your mother isn't, teaching you right or something like that. It was always blaming the mother. And if your husband cheated on you, it was because you were not doing enough to keep your man.
Yeah. Your womanly duties or whatever. Okay.
Yes. What they call the cult of true womanhood.
Oh, there's a name for it? I didn't know
There
that.
is.
Cult of True Womanhood.
The Cult of True Womanhood. Look it up.
Yeah, I'm going to.
It had
So,
to do with what was considered the women's sphere versus the men's sphere in the world. It's just
well, not what was the men's sphere and the women's sphere then?
anything that wasn't the home.
Oh, okay. So,
Politics, work,
so they
anything that wasn't the home.
compartmentalized it, kind of like the women are everything at home and guys are everything else. Kind of going, wow. I feel like that'd be a
Yep.
whole different podcast to go down that rabbit hole potentially.
Oh, yeah. I'm not sure I could do it without throwing up. That aspect of history it's pretty bad.
Yeah. So
it's pretty bad.
What can people do to get more towards the internal side, or should they take that test first, like you recommended me, to see where they fall first and foremost?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there's several. There are, you can take the test free online. There's several of them. I can't recommend a specific one necessarily, but I would try to find one that has more questions, because sort of the longer it is, the better you're likely to get better information. But yeah, I think it's not a bad idea to sort of see where you lie. I think most people, most internal people kind of know they're internal. A lot of external don't know they're external.
Yeah.
But the idea is, I think, to try to increase both internal locus of control and self-efficacy at the same time. Because both of them will really help you. Not to be so on the internal side that you're taking responsibility for things that are not yours, or thinking that you can do stuff that you can't do, because again, we don't control everything. But it's another mindfulness kind of thing, right? It's like when something happens, to stop and look at what you think about that. To what do you attribute it? Do you attribute it always or most of the time to things outside of yourself? Or do you attribute it most of the time to things inside of yourself? Or are you able to maybe see a little bit of both? Like, yeah, I did this. This was not good. This piece is on me. Maybe there were some pieces that aren't on you. Maybe some stuff just happened in the world that wasn't good, and it impacted you, and it was really hard. And you did the best you could. But if you want to improve and you want to learn and you want to cope better, the only way to do that is to learn when you do make a mistake, right? Like when something doesn't work, like maybe you engaged in some kind of coping thing and it didn't work. And this is particularly true of negative coping behaviors. Like, every time something goes wrong, you drink.
Right.
Right. Or you take drugs, or you beat your dog up, or you do something that is having a negative impact on you and on your relationships, on the world, on your job. Like if things are not going well in a general sense in your life, to stop and think about what are my pieces, not judge them. This isn't I'm making mistakes and I'm a terrible person. You lop off the second half of that sentence. You have to take responsibility. You don't have to take judgment. And responsibility taking is really just saying, I'm an actor in my own life. I did this. You don't have to take the rest of it. And that's important, because if you do all the judging, you're not as likely to take responsibility, because it's too painful. If you take all that, if you do a lot of judging and shooting on yourself and shaming yourself about things, that's part of the reason people avoid, right? It's like, it's not so much that they're avoiding responsibility, they're avoiding the pain of all the judgment. You can stop the judgment piece and just focus on I did this didn't work. Okay. This did not serve me. This caused a problem in my relationship. This caused a problem in my work. This caused me to feel bad about myself. Whatever it is, what could I do differently? And that might be, if you keep asking that question and you don't know, then that might be the time to go to therapy. So you could get some answers to those questions about what to do. If you know what to do, then try doing what you know what to do. Okay. And looking at things like they're experiments. It's an experiment to figure out, if I do this, what happens? If I show up on time to work every day, am I in trouble? Probably not. Your boss is probably a lot happier. And if you can't figure out how to show up to work every day, then that's the problem to solve. It's like, okay, what do I need to do to stop being late? And I actually had a client like this who had been a long-term, a high-level professional who did get fired because she was late all the time. I mean, really late. And there was a lot of like, well, but they have to, no, they don't have to understand. You have to understand that if you keep doing this, this is a consequence of your behavior. They're not being horrible to you. You're doing this. And in our culture, like it or not, being on time is important.
Right.
And she had no sense of time. And so there were problems there with sort of like, how do I even do this? And so we worked on it, and she started showing up on time, and she got her job back.
Awesome.
Yeah. It just wasn't, she was not a time person. It wasn't super important to her, but part of adulting in essence is learning also what's important to other people.
Okay. Yeah.
Just because it's not important to you doesn't mean it isn't important in the world, or it isn't important to other people. And if you want something, sometimes you also have to do what's important to other people. So being on time may not be that important to you, but if it's important in your work, and you like your work, and you like making a living and paying your bills, then you still don't have to think it's important, but you need to do the behavior. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
So it's being mindful. It's working little by little to examine what you do in the world, and looking at the consequence of what you do, and not always that, oh, it's, they're doing this to me, and I didn't do anything to start it. Like, back up a step. Well, he's mad, I'm late. Okay, but let's look at the lateness.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, you answered my question, because it's like, well, what do people do when they don't know the answer? And it's like, it was like very blaring, go find a therapist, right?
Yeah, go find a therapist. Another thing, if you really don't want to go to therapy, although obviously I'm a big fan of it, and I think it's very effective. But another thing that you can do is, if you have a friend or a relative or somebody that you feel is very successful in life, like they do really well, their relationships are good, they do well at work, they're happy, go talk to them and find out why. What are they doing? So I can almost guarantee you that they have an internal locus of control, that they have a sense of self-efficacy, and they're proactive. They go out and they do stuff. And learn from them.
That's such a cool idea for people who are scared of therapy, right? Or just, it's easier to talk to somebody who, and I've been going to therapy for so long, I don't know what the fear is anymore. Like, if it's,
yeah,
you know what I mean? If as a kid,
I understand it. I think
grew up with it.
It's scary though. I mean, it's really, well, part of the fear is that people have a lot of misconceptions of what therapy is, because therapy is done in secret. Mm-hmm. And the portrayals of therapy that are done often in TV and movies and stuff like that are just so wildly inaccurate.
Yeah, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or something like that. Right?
Well, I mean, even just in other shows where they're like revealing confidential information to their friends or what, you don't do that. Or they're manipulating clients, or, half the time the therapist is the serial killer.
Right.
Or
that would scare anyone.
They're either evil, or they're the dumbest person in the room, right? Yeah. They're just stupid. They don't know anything. So they're like a parody.
Yeah.
Right. So I think people don't really have a clear idea of what it is to go to therapy, and the idea they do have is negative sometimes because of what they've seen portrayed in the media. And I think they also think that somehow, if you go to a therapist, they're going to tell you you're crazy, or they're going to tell you you're beyond help, or they're going to pop the top of your head off, start manipulating you or something, and not kind of understanding that, look, if your therapist is a good therapist, they're working on what you want to work on. I don't have an agenda. My agenda is to work on what my clients want to work on. I'm not in the background going, ooh, let me do this, kind of thing. I don't have some hidden thing going on. I want to know what their goals are. And we talk about those goals, and then we work towards those goals. I'm not steering in some other direction.
Because I got that question, like, what is the ideal form of mental health? Like, what's the goal? What is everyone trying to get to? What are therapists helping you to achieve? And do you have an answer for that? Is it to give somebody and I know everybody's different, but is the answer somewhere along the lines of, I'm going to help you get to where you want to be, where you can live in a life that feels I hate to say happy, but content and do the things that you want to do. Or
Happy is an okay word.
yeah, it just
Depends on how you define it, right?
yeah, there just seems to be a lot of chasing happiness and doesn't seem to work. It's like it becomes more elusive if you chase it.
Well, I think it's how I think happy is defined differently by
Right. Okay.
different people. So like if somebody came into me and said, I want to be happy, I would say, what would you be doing if you were happy that you're not doing now?
Okay.
And then those would become the goals, basically. Well, I'd be socializing more. I'd be okay, let's start. How would you socialize more? What could you do this week?
Gotcha.
I'd have a different job. Okay, how do you get out of the job you're in, and what do you need to do to get the job you want? Right.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, this is a very old debate about what the ultimate goal is. But I think when I am working with somebody, I really don't have like a hidden agenda. But the bottom line, I think, is for to say that somebody is mentally healthy is it's not somebody who never has problems.
Right.
It's not somebody who never has negative emotions. One of the things I think it's really important for people to understand is that coping is not the absence of feeling. So you can be having a lot of strong feelings. You can be sad, you can be angry, frustrated, whatever, and still be coping really well. Those are not the same thing.
Okay.
So it's not the absence of feeling. I think people who are functioning well, so they are able to problem solve, they have satisfactory relationships that are mutually, compatible, mutually satisfying. They're not doing harm in the world. That I would not help somebody. If somebody came in and said, "Oh, I want to learn to be a better serial killer," no. I'm not going to help somebody learn how to be harmful in the world or more harmful in the world. So I think, people that are feeling good about themselves in a general sense, people that are mostly realistic. Again, you don't want to be completely all the time. That tends to be more depressing, but has a healthy dose of optimism with some reality mixed in. And I think the ability to ask for help is important because we need help. We're human beings are not solitary creatures. We're not meant to be, and it doesn't work for us to be by and large. So, and contentment, I think, is good, and whatever that means to you, because some people are highly ambitious and they really want to do a lot of stuff, and that's great. And so for them, contentment is I keep going and I do a lot of stuff. For somebody else, contentment is I work at the 7-Eleven and I go surfing every day. And that makes me happy. Okay. There's nothing right or wrong about ambition. You don't have to be ambitious, and you don't have to be. We have a culture that's all, go for this and do it.
Yeah. Stay hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Work hard, play hard, all this stuff. Not necessarily. If you like that, go for it. But if you want to sit at home and read a book, sit at home and read a book if that makes you happy. But it's being okay with that, right? It's like also being okay with who you are and what your preferences are, even if they're not what, the motivational posters are telling you ought to be.
Right. So does a good therapist help you navigate like what you want versus maybe, I hate to call it brainwash, but like what we read on social media or Facebook or things, and you're sliding into those traps?
Yes. I think a good therapist, if that's your goal, again, if that's your goal is to figure that out, I think a good therapist does help you to figure out what's you and what's culture.
How do you help tap people into what you are, though? Like, that's been a huge question for me and something I find really fascinating. Like, how do you point people to listen to themselves more, tune into that?
Well, I think you ask a lot of questions, first of all. So when somebody, says, well, I'm going to do, is that what you want to do, or is that what you think you should do? Mm. And have them stop and think about, is this what I really want? And sometimes, honestly, we have to do things we don't want to do.
Right.
But that shouldn't be the whole of your life, is that you're just constantly doing things. I have to have chocolate ice cream when I really want vanilla. There are a lot of choices that we can make that there is no right or wrong answer. It's just a choice. So which do you want? Other things, we have to do that. You got to pay your bills and you got to pay your taxes, and there's stuff that none of us are like, oh yeah, yay, taxes. But whether you want to do that or not doesn't matter. You need to do it. So it's also helping people to define those things, right? Is what are the things I really have to versus the things that I can make choices about. I mean, technically you could not pay your taxes as long as you're okay with going to jail.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, as long as you're okay with consequences,
Yeah.
You can do stuff, but there will be consequences. And that's that's the internal, external thing. Is internal people kind of understand, if I do X, Y happens.
They're usually okay with why. Say they decide not to pay taxes and they get caught. Well, I mean, no, this is hypothetical that we're talking about. But if they know that they made this decision and they know the consequences, are they usually more okay with the consequences? Versus
not an external. An internal person probably would be,
that's
but
what I meant.
an external person.
I mixed them up. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No,
so an internal person would be okay, but an external person blows up, kind of.
Yeah,
right?
An internal person would expect it.
Right.
Because again, they feel that it would be my fault. I did it.
Yep.
Right. I know I did
got
it.
Me. Yeah.
Yeah. An external person would be like, but I shouldn't have to pay taxes. And it's not fair. And I don't have money or whatever. I mean, again, there would be this whole external thing, as opposed to you made a decision to engage in a behavior, but I didn't have the money. But you could have called the IRS and they have payment plans and stuff. Like, again, there would be an excuse basically for why. And then they would be, raging about the IRS that it wasn't fair or right or whatever because they fill in the blank. And that's the danger in it is that there's this kind of passivity and not taking responsibility. And then there can be very real consequences to being that passive or not doing things and waiting for things to just happen or expecting other people to take care of you or doing something like that. So you have, like, if you had a more extreme external person who expected their parents to just continue to pay for them, take care of them, whatever, and then the parents die and there's no money. Well, you never worked, and now you're 50 years old, and what are you going to do? I mean, you could be in very dire straits and end up on the street and still be going, but they should have left me money, but still not able to kind of say, it's my life and I have to take some responsibility for it. So there are real dangers on the external side and the highly external side. And the other thing with the highly external side is they tend not to have good relationships because there's just so much blame involved that other people tend to stay away from them.
It feels like it'd be very energy draining if you feel like you're always trying to take care of that type of person on the other side of the relationship until it just burns you out eventually.
Well, exactly. I mean, nobody wants to constantly be told, you made me mad. It's kind of like an abuser. I hit you because you gave me peas instead of broccoli.
Right. Yeah.
Seriously? I mean, but that is an external control kind of thing. It's like, oh, you made me do this.
Is this part of like narcissism piece? Or
yeah, sometimes. But I mean, some narcissists can be external, but not everybody who has an external locus of control is a narcissist.
Right. It gets really kind of mucky because psychology, everything seems to overlap, in a lot of different ways,
Well, things are very interconnected, right? Because we are integrated beings. Yeah, we're integrated beings. So you can't just separate out one thing but that's the difficulty of something like this is it's a domino effect. So with the external thing, there's all these dominoes that fall behind it in terms of the consequences for somebody's life. And I've seen it, I've seen it a lot in clients who have relatives who are very external and they're trying to, the client's internal, they're external, and they're trying very hard to kind of have a relationship with that person because it's their sister or their mother or whatever. And it's just super hard because there's just this constant blaming and anger and resentment. Well, you got this and okay. But even if I did get that, I got it because I did, well, yeah, you have that fancy job. And well, yeah, I have the fancy job because I went and did all this money and time and effort to get a degree. And then I worked really hard to get the fancy job. Right. There's a sense of it's handed to you.
Yeah.
And it wasn't handed to me. And so therefore that isn't fair.
Yeah.
And so, this is why it's destructive.
Yeah. And life isn't always fair either.
It's not.
No.
I mean, unfair things happen all the time, but something else that's interesting along the lines of that, we talked about the if only thing, if only I'd done this, if only I'd done that, we assume that great things would have happened. The interesting thing with the fairness issue is that we also tend to only look at when life not being fair when it isn't fair in a negative way. But life isn't fair in positive ways too. And we don't ever go, oh God, that's so not fair that I won the lottery. Oh no, or I got this thing, whatever. I found that $20 on the ground or something. That's not fair. We don't rail against fairness when it goes in our favor.
Wow. Well, oh man, I'm not gonna be able to stop thinking about that the rest of the day, I don't think.
That's true though, right?
Yeah, that's pretty wild. Oh my gosh. Huh. Wow. Yeah, that happens all the time. So does that come from like a protective mechanism in us as a way, or like evolutionary?
No,
who knows?
It's just a mindset. I mean, again, it's kind of the attribution thing. I think we don't even see it as being unfair. It's kind of like, oh, I deserved it somehow, that I got this thing, or I'm lucky or something. And it's like, well, maybe, but if you look at luck, there is a certain unfairness in luck, that one person got lucky to get something and somebody else didn't.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, fairness as a concept is very slippery, because it's something that's extremely hard to define across situations. I mean, some situations it's pretty easy to do, but in a lot of life, it's just not that easy to pin down.
Yeah.
And so then it just becomes an opinion. This is what I think is fair, right?
Yeah,
or this is what I think is fair. And then it's not factual. There's not a external aspect of fairness. It's just, I think this is fair or not fair.
Wow. Can we go talk about one more thing before you go? In grad school, we did, I think we were in nutrition class or something like that, but we were talking about behavior change and how hard that is for people. And it was painful just to hear the research on it, to the fact that like there had to be almost like a massive traumatic event or something big enough to make you want to make a change. And is the research still similar to that, or is it still the same where like changing your behavior is difficult unless you have a big enough reason to want to change it?
Well, I don't think that it's not so much you have to have a big enough reason. You have to have a reason that motivates you, and but that's just human nature. So that's never going to change. I mean, human nature is such that we don't really like change, and we are pretty hedonistic. So we only like things that feel good. And change is scary. A lot of times it doesn't feel that great. We're also immediate gratifiers. We really like things to happen and we want them now. And change doesn't usually just happen now.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of elements to change that make change hard. We also have competing motivations quite frequently. So is there some kind of junk food that you like?
Oh, dark chocolate is my weakness.
Oh, yeah. Dark chocolate's not a junk food. Come on, milk chocolate's a junk food, but dark chocolate's not.
We got a cheeseburger place in town if you want to use that.
All right, so do you want to have a cheeseburger, right?
Yeah.
Because you like them.
Yep.
Do you also want to be fit?
Yeah. Right.
It's not that you don't want to be fit until you eat a cheeseburger, or you eat a cheeseburger, you don't want to be fit. You really do want both things, but that's the problem. You want both things, and they may be mutually exclusive. And that can make change harder. And the thing about something like fitness takes time, it takes effort, it's hard, we're also energy conserving. I should have said we tend to not want to put extra effort in. If we can avoid it, we're just, and a lot of this is just very kind of evolutionary, right? It's, it's what we had to do to survive. Going and having a cheeseburger is immediately gratifying. It's hedonistic. It takes very little effort, and you enjoy it. It's like, it has that hedonistic factor. So it fits human nature quite well. Change does not. So you need some motivation, and again, you also need to think that you need to change, because why would you change if you didn't think you needed to change? Because it's hard. If I don't think I need to change, I'm really going to change because it's hard to change.
Wow. Yeah. That makes sense. Like, well, as a trainer, I would, I was the GA of our wellness center on our campus, and they gave me all the special population people. So it was people who were morbidly obese with health issues, and they were also seeing a counselor or therapist at the same time. They called it a Special U, I think, as the program. But all those people, when I got them, they were more motivated from my personal experience than the other clients I had prior to that. And it seemed like because they were told you're only going to live to this date, or they have a wedding or something like that. And it just seemed like that was a big enough motivator to create that change. And then they worked so hard, and not that like their weights or their level was really high, but they just knew that if I didn't do this, I wasn't going to see my kids graduate high school or something like that. And
it mattered to them.
And it mattered. And I think about that with mental health though, too, is there a barrier from people looking internally and without the shit hitting the fan, as we were talking about earlier? Like how can you help people see the benefit of helping with their mental health? It seems like if you talk into a business sense, or this is going to help with your school or something they're working on that matters to them, and how working on potentially their mental health, that might be a doorway into getting these tools before something catastrophic potentially could happen,
Yeah, it's called leverage. It's having a leverage that matters enough to you to overcome our kind of natural inertia, of sitting around and not doing things. The people that you're talking about that came in, that you had, the kind of morbidly obese people who had been told this. There are also other morbidly obese people who have been told the same thing, but they don't change.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yep.
So again, there's still an internal factor there. Because if everybody is told that, and it was really being told that made you change, then everybody who was told that would change.
Yeah.
But they don't. It has to mean something to you. And so for the people that tried to change or did change, it meant something to them to make that change. Or hearing that meant something. So this is the problem, is you don't know what's going to be a catalyst for each individual, because again, everybody who, you hit a certain weight, every physician is going to start telling you, hey,
they've all heard
you're going to have some big problems here, right? Like, heart disease, diabetes, whatever. But some of them still don't change. Same thing with smoking or drinking or any behavior that can cause health issues. Some people will really take that to heart and make efforts to do something different, and other people won't. So it's finding something that's meaningful enough to you as an individual, or to the person in therapy, sort of helping people find their own leverage, that your need to change becomes bigger than your fear of changing.
Got it.
I think is often the thing, because we do fear change for all those reasons. We don't know if it's going to work. We think we have to give things up. It's not going to be pleasurable. It's going to be hard. Like there are all these factors that kind of go against our general nature. And so you do have to find something that's kind of more important or big enough to you to help you to move into it. But I also think that how it's approached really matters in whether people make those changes. And it's why I think the mind trick that we had talked about in a previous podcast is so usable, because you're not asking people to make big changes at once, where they can easily fail, where it's demotivating, it's discouraging, and then they just give up. When you set these super, super, super small goals that you can achieve, then that increases your sense of self-efficacy over time. That, I can't look, I did it. That means I can do it. If you don't, again, whether you think you can or can't, you're right. So if you don't think you can do it, you won't do it. Why? Because logically that makes sense, right? Why would I try to do something that I absolutely do not believe I can do? That logically, that wouldn't make sense for me to try.
Right. And we're here to conserve energy, right? So that's why it's really easy to kind of throw that away.
Yeah, but if I just don't think I can, there's just no logic in trying. Like if I can't do something, why would I make that effort? That's a waste.
Right.
So I have to have some sense I can. But part of learning that you can is doing it and actually having it work. And when people set goals that are too big, we've talked about that exercise, thing with the mind trick of, if you say that you're going to go and walk for 20 minutes and you walk for 10 minutes, you feel bad because you did half your goal. You failed at your goal, and that's not motivating. It doesn't make you want to come back and do it again for most people. Right. It's gonna make you not want to try because we don't like to approach things that we fail at. But if you say you're going to walk for 5 minutes and you walk for 10 minutes, you probably feel pretty great because you doubled your goal. You did it, and it's, you were successful. It's motivating. It's reinforcing. Now I want to go do it again. It's the same 10 minutes. It's not what you do that matters in that sense. It's what you said you were going to do that matters. And you see that with weight loss goals. If you go back to your example, right? When people set a goal, I'm going to lose 100 pounds and whatever, and they lose 80 pounds. Some people will still feel really good about that.
Yeah.
And that'll be great for them. But other people will feel discouraged.
Right.
I should have lost more. I didn't meet my goal, blah, blah, blah. I might as well just give up because, see, I can't do it. You did do it. And the goal was artificial to begin with. Goals are artificial, points that we're trying to get to, but they don't actually exist out in the world. They exist in our heads.
Right.
So
it should be on a shirt.
It doesn't exist in the world. It only exists in your head. But make a very small goal. And if you pass it, that's great. You feel even better. And that's motivating because it's reinforcing. And that's also human nature. It's actually the nature of all mammals is, if you get reinforced for something, you tend to repeat it. That's how you train dogs and whales and all kinds of things.
Pavlov's dogs, right? Yeah.
Well, no, that's actually classical conditioning. This is operant conditioning.
Oh,
operant. It's called operant conditioning. Skinner. That's Skinner.
Yeah, B.F. Skinner's birds, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. The pigeons. But that's how we learn, and it's how we tend to repeat behaviors. The things that are reinforced are repeated. Okay. So if you want to try to change something, think of it in very small increments. And I think the other thing is don't look for the one big fix because it doesn't exist. Mentally, physically, people kind of look for that. Well, what's the one big thing I have to change? It's not one big thing. It's usually like a whole bunch of little things. And that's actually way easier. It's way easier to change a bunch of small things incrementally, a little bit at a time. You're turning the Titanic slowly away from the iceberg, than it is to try to change one really big thing like a big tidal wave that, splashes over your whole life and you're scared of what it's going to mean. So doing very small things. And again, this is kind of where a therapist can help you, because one of the things that you do in therapy is you pace. So you help people to pace themselves, that they don't just, kind of try to run into a bunch of changes. I call it doing a Wile E. Coyote, and I'm going to have to stop because the kids today don't know what that is. But there used to be an old cartoon, the Roadrunner cartoons, and there was a coyote in it, Wile E. Coyote, and he was constantly chasing the Roadrunner. He'd run off a cliff before he knew it. And then he'd have this little sign that said, "Yikes," and then he'd fall. And you don't want to be Wile E. Coyote. You don't want to run off a cliff when you're trying to make a bunch of changes, because you'll scare yourself. You do too much too quickly, and then you'll just run back. It's way better to pace and make a small change, kind of stand there for a minute and get used to it so it doesn't, create a lot of anxiety. Make another small change, stand there and get used to it, another small change. And those changes may get incrementally bigger as you get used to changing. But you never generally want to start with something really huge. Unless it's just an emergency that you do so.
Yeah.
You are about to die from alcoholism or something, and you really, really, really need to stop drinking.
Yeah.
But then you'd need to be medically supervised, even, doing something like that. But
oh, my wife was just talking about, she works in the jail. This is a little side note, but it made me think about it. Like they kept, she was just told they kept the bars open, or not the bars, the liquor stores open during COVID because people would have alcohol poisoning in their homes if they didn't have alcohol. And that was more, or not poisoning, withdrawal. Sorry.
The withdrawal. Yeah. And withdrawal can be very dangerous and deadly if you are severely alcoholic.
And that just blew my mind because at the time, I don't know if you thought that, but why are liquor stores staying open? And then it was just like, oh, well, that makes sense. They're trying to not kill people.
It's deadly. Withdrawal off of any depressant, like alcohol or benzodiazepines or any depressant medication, can be very deadly. And you shouldn't do it without some kind of medical supervision.
Yeah.
But at any rate, making the smaller, starting out incrementally And the thing with the mind trick is that you never make a goal that you don't feel you can absolutely make, that you can absolutely do it. The idea is not to challenge yourself. And I think that's the other piece is we do all this challenge and then we feel frightened, I can't do it. So then I don't try to do it because it's better, psychologically, we just feel better not trying than failing. That's something that was important to us to do. So it's how you approach change.
Okay.
You can change, and people change every day. I see it constantly. I've worked with into the thousands of clients now over time. I've seen tons and tons and tons and tons of people make changes.
Yeah.
But you have to want it for some reason, whatever that reason is. And it's a personal reason. Because again, it's the meaning that it is to you. It's not a meaning that it is to someone else. It's like, what does it mean to you to achieve whatever this changes that you're trying to make? And then to do it slowly and incrementally, in a way that feels good to you and feels like progress. And then just also helping people to not fall in the trap of all or none. Either I've completely changed or I haven't changed at all. It's like, no, some is always better than none. We're not trying to be perfect here. And, even if you hit a goal, it may be that now you transition to a different kind of goal or something else because you reach a point and now the view is different. Yeah. And I see I thought I wanted this, but now I really want that.
That's what ended my pole vault career is I got close enough to the top of the mountain to see what it was like to go, oh, I never really wanted to go to the Olympics anyways. And I'm kind of sick of living at home with my parents, this whole, yeah. But then, that you're fighting those other demons of, well, I've come this far, kind of a thing.
Yeah, there's a whole, I can't remember the name of it. I'd have to look it up, but there is a whole psychological construct around, and it's a fallacy. It's a logical fallacy of, I kind of need to keep putting effort in because I've already put effort in.
Yeah, that happens to me all the time.
It's very common. That's why it's like known. It's like a known, logical fallacy. People will do it with money. Well, I've already spent this much, so I should just keep spending more to get, instead of saying no, I need to stop because I've already spent this much. I don't really want to spend more, either effort, psychological, physical effort, or money. But it's kind of like we think we're going to lose more somehow if we don't continue, as opposed to just cutting the loss and saying, no, I'm done. I've reached my point. This is as much as I want to put into it. And just kind of either accepting a loss, or it's not really a loss. You got something out of it. You just didn't go further.
Yeah.
You didn't lose anything. You just didn't gain something beyond it.
What was that?
And those are two different things.
What was that fallacy called? You just said?
I don't know. I can't remember what the name of it is. Sorry. I'd have to look it up. I just know that it exists, and it has to do with estimation of cost, and with people sort of continuing beyond what it makes sense to do, or way beyond what they want to do, because of a sense of, I'm losing something if I kind of just don't keep going. And potentially in money, maybe you might lose whatever you've already put in, but you don't lose more. Yeah. And gamblers do that, right? I've already, I've lost it. I'm just going to keep, I'll make it back. But in a situation, I think like yours, you gained what you gained.
Yeah.
And you got a lot out of that. I mean, clearly, pole vaulting and what that meant to you and what it still means to you and your career and all this stuff, you gained a tremendous amount. Right. You just didn't keep going. So you didn't lose anything. You just didn't gain more.
Yeah.
I think that, and that's the piece people have a hard time with, is they feel like, oh, I potentially lost something. Well, but you didn't. You just didn't gain more, and potentially you wouldn't have.
Yeah, it's just it gets strange because I was just talking to my other buddy who's in the same. He's 10 years younger than me. Just saw him last weekend about the external pressure from people when they put Olympics as the goal always, and we both were talking about. He said he just felt finally could talk to somebody about this. He's like, I don't really care if I go to the Olympics. I just like hanging out with my friends and pole vaulting all over the world, and I like doing that. And if I make the Olympics, cool. I'm not saying I don't want to do that. It'll be a great experience, but it's not my big goal. I just want to keep doing this as long as I can. So, because it's fun. I was like, I was that person too. I wish you were around when I was jumping and I could have talked about this.
Yeah, I bet.
Because stopping was hard,
Yeah. Well, it is, because so many people that is the public focus, right? That's the
Correct.
public goal
Yeah.
of a lot of sports, is especially things that are considered more amateur sports, as opposed to like football, baseball, all
That's
that
a
stuff.
money. Just for
Yeah,
NFL.
yeah, the money sports. Is that, well, of course, you must want to go to the Olympics because that's the pinnacle of achievement, blah, 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 blah. But the pinnacle achievement is what you think it is.
Right.
For you. And that's, again, this is the piece that's very hard for people, is that they just go so externally to cultural stuff. But one of the things that can help with that is to understand that culture is just a set of beliefs. It's not fact. It's just a set of beliefs that people have agreed to. And culture changes all the time too. And that's how you know that it is in fact, because it changes all the time.
Oh man.
We start to agree to a different set of facts.
Yeah, this is wild. So you can treat culture the same way you treat your thoughts, essentially.
Exactly. Because that's all it is. It's just collective thought.
Oh,
and that's
man.
and
Brain.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, am I wrong? Is that,
No,
I mean,
you're right. I just never tied that or put that together. That's wild. Huh.
Yeah, it's collective thought. And if you and you can see that by the fact that it changes. And it changes, interestingly enough, based on individuals deciding something that, oh, that's not right. And every cultural shift has happened because people decided, I don't believe that.
Something was important enough to them to create the change, essentially.
And they don't believe it. Like they didn't buy into that cultural belief. They didn't go, oh, that's a fact that women are inferior, and they can develop hysteria, where literally hysteria means wandering uterus, and they thought that your uterus could literally wander around your body.
Yeah.
So
and fall out if you ran a mile. Yeah.
Yeah, enough people went, what? To go, yeah, no, let's think differently about this, and then try to become more public in that change in belief. And then you start to get more and more people who go, oh yeah, you know what? I think maybe you're right. This isn't right. And over time, a whole culture shifts in those beliefs to where what was initially a minority belief becomes a majority belief. You see that more recently with things like gay marriage.
Correct, yeah.
Which, if you go back only 30 years or so, a vast majority of people disagreed with gay marriage and did not think that should ever happen. And then fast forward to now, a majority of people think, of course, and have no problem with it. Now, you always have the hangers on, right? You always have the people that are against it. You'd still have people that think women are inferior, whatever. But that's how you get cultural shift, is people just stop agreeing with that belief system. And they work to change, to get other people to come along with what they believe.
Wow. That's such a cool way of looking at that. So yeah. So essentially what you're doing with yourself, you can do with culture at the same time, but it all starts with just, it seems to always go back to, you have to pay attention. You have to bring some awareness to what's going on inside and around you, and ask with curiosity, like, why is this?
And I think, and you have to be an investigator, in essence. You have to look at evidence for things. What's my evidence that this is a fact rather than a belief? And there's nothing wrong with having beliefs. I mean, people have beliefs, and beliefs can help us, right? People have religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, beliefs about family, whatever. We have beliefs, and it's fine to have beliefs, even if there's not a particular factual basis for it, as long as they're not harmful. I mean, there's some very harmful beliefs that people have that have no factual belief basis, but some beliefs are just comforting and they help us. But in terms of a lot of our decision making in the world, it works a lot better to try to figure out what's true.
Right.
And as much as we can know it. Sometimes we don't. Again, sometimes there are facts we don't know what they are. They're not apparent to us. They're hidden in some way. And so that's why I'm saying you can make a decision, and it's not really even a mistake. It just didn't work, or whatever, because maybe there were some things you just didn't know about.
That just tied my last question. Well, because I remember in grad school almost being frustrated because there was a lot of times where you'd read the research and they're like, we still don't know. Like it was one of those, we did the experiment. We still don't know. We still don't know it. And being okay with the I don't know is something that has helped me a lot, but I still wrestle with that because I don't know if just as humans, we always want to close the loop. Like maybe all stories end up wanting, or music even does the same thing. They end on the same note they started with. And it's just going, I don't know yet. And just being that's the answer instead of trying to close
Yeah,
that.
it's finding an acceptance, right? I mean, this comes back to like, you can think about a lot of things and you can come to a lot of conclusions, but eventually you have to jump.
Right.
The first time you pole vaulted, you had a lot of information, but you had to jump.
Had to just do it. Yeah.
I mean, there are things that we are not going to always know, and you have to make a decision anyway. And that's just life. Not everything has an answer. Jung said some problems have no solutions, and that might seem like, to me, like, oh, that's the bad news. There's a problem that doesn't have a solution. But there's good news in that too, because if that's the case, you can stop looking for one. And you can just accept it, that, okay, this is just something that happens, right? Or that this is a quirk that I do. Like, I'm horrible at math. I have a math disability, and it's like, okay, I just do whatever. I use a calculator. I ask my friends whatever. I ask my Echo, what's X number, because I mess it up all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a problem that doesn't really have a solution. Whatever. I don't need to solve the problem that I'm not good at math. I just figure out how to get math done when I need to do math. And there's lots of things out there that you don't need to change them. They just are. You can accept it. It is what it is. As long as I think that the question is it harming you? Is it causing you distress? Is it causing distress in the world? If not, who cares? So be quirky, be yourself. Be unique, people always ask me about my blue hair, right? Like, why do you have blue hair? I don't know. I just like it. Do I have to have a reason other than that I like it?
Right. Yeah.
No.
I always get asked how many Yankees hats and green shirts I have.
Yeah, people are like, well, why would you do that? That's whatever. I'm like, you don't have to like. I never said you have to like it. I just have to like it.
Right.
And you can, if this will sound funny coming from a therapist, but you can analyze things too much. If it's just a preference and you like it, if you analyze it to death, you can kind of kill your pleasure in it. So just enjoy it.
Yeah.
If it's not harmful, just enjoy it. I just like it. I don't need to analyze why I like it. There's a lot of things I like. I like cowboy stuff. Like, I have a ton of cowboy boots and cowboy clothes and stuff. I just like it.
Yeah.
Whatever. Why do I need a reason other than that it makes me happy? And so there's no reason to analyze everything to death. There's no reason to justify why you like a certain thing or don't like a certain thing, because life is just too short for all that. Figure out the things you need to figure out, not the stuff that doesn't need figuring out.
Yeah.
That's enough, right? That's enough energy to figure out the stuff I need to figure out so that my life works and I'm happy and have good relationships and those kinds of things. I don't need to figure out everything else.
Yeah. Well, and you've touched on it a little bit here. Thinking takes so much energy from me, and I never really thought of for a long time as thoughts as creating energy or using your energy. And I don't know why, because anytime you see a student studying for a final or something, they're just wiped for a week, they're just toast. Yeah. And just for somebody who's always constantly analyzing and thinking and trying to figure things out, there's like a gift in that, I think, that I have, but there's also like a balance that I'm still trying to find in a lot of ways with that too.
Yeah. I mean, I used to do a lot like you, and I had to learn that it's okay to just be.
Yeah.
And not do.
Right.
And this mindfulness, I think, helps with that, because you can be in the moment, and the thing that you focus on is just, how does it feel? Not what do I think about it?
Yeah.
Right. So like when you're eating something, or you're like, how does this feel? It feels good. I like the taste or whatever. And I don't have to analyze the thing, just be in the experience.
Yeah.
And that can really help, because there's so many things in life, little things. I mean, most of our life is made up of little things, not big things. Very, very few of us have big things that happen very often. You probably less than 2 hands you could count the number of big things you get in life. But every day you got all kinds of little things. And a lot of those things can be quite pleasurable, can make you happy. You can enjoy them if you allow that. If you don't judge it and you just have the experience. So you put on something that, an article of clothing that feels good, and you love the material, and you're just like, what does this feel? Oh, this is really nice. I like this. Or, I like things that smell good. So like good smelling soaps or shampoos or lotions or whatever, and like really pay attention to like, oh yeah, I feel good when I smell that. I have some singing bowls. I do like singing bowls sometimes, because I'm very musical. And so I like sound. So just, little things that don't cost a lot of money. You don't have to take a lot of time, but you can really enjoy them, and it puts your mind and your body into, this nice, pleasant state. And the body it's amazing how geared we are for pleasure. We can experience pleasure in like a million different ways, and it does not even take a lot. It just takes paying attention. Stuff that you like, the sound of, the smell of, the taste of, the feel of, the look of, just looking at a picture of people you love and really focusing on these people that you can make you feel really good. It's just, we don't have to work that hard at it. We just don't attend.
Yeah. Wow. I think we should end it on that. That was a really high note.
I try.
Yeah. Wow. Last time we gave you a magic wand and you could change mental health any way you want. Do you want to double down on that, or do you want to change your wand wish?
Well, I'd have to remember what it was.
Oh, I'll tell you, because last time you said you wanted to give kids these skills, to get it into schools potentially and have it earlier. And
yeah,
I thought that was
I would still wish that. But I think in addition, perhaps to that.
Yeah, you get 2 wishes now.
Yeah, 2 wishes. Hey, there are no limits, right?
Right.
I think the stuff that we were kind of just talking about is that people would cut out a lot of cut out some of the judgment part that's value judgment, use better judgment about decision making, and find ways to enjoy their lives and stay in the moment instead of thinking about what happened 10 years ago or what might happen 20 years from now. Certainly planning is important, like to just be where you are and find something pleasurable or good in the moment that you're in, because what you see really does depend on what you look. And maybe in another talk we can talk about perspective, because that's kind of what it is, and perspective really matters. What you focus on is a lot of how you're going to feel. So just finding those moments, I hope that people will find those moments to find pleasure and joy, and not think you have to do something big to get those things.
Dr. Elam, you're the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you found that extremely helpful. I put Dr. Elam's information down in the show notes below if you'd like to reach out or contact her if you have any questions. Reach out to me on social media and I can pass those along, or if you have questions for me, let me know. Again, if you'd like to support this podcast, onewholelifemedia.com or owlmh.com. I bought so many domains just because I didn't know what to call it, but all of those work and they send you to the exact same place. So, guys, in the next podcast, we are talking to an Olympic gold medalist who turned mental health advocate. I'm really excited to share that one with you. And remember, as always, life is meant to be experienced and curiosity will get you there. See ya.